Friday, Sexy First Friday for May. Because it's May 1st today, this actually kind of snuck up on us that it's already May. I'm just going to wait for Lyndsey to join. Hopefully, we don't have any technical problems. Oh, hi, everybody who's here already.
Hi.
Hey, Lyndsey. Happy May.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it's May already.
I know. I was saying it snuck up on us a little since this is May 1st. It's not usually the first day of the month on our first Sexy First Friday. So many people are on here already. Hi, everyone. Well, we're excited to be back, and we are on our Enneagram Basics series, episode 2, Finding Your Type. Now, before you get scared off because you already know your type, it's not just for people who don't know their type. We're going to cover a whole bunch of aspects of the typing process that are relevant to people who already know their type as well, and maybe just of interest to anyone in the Enneagram world. So, before we dive in, our standard introductions. I'm Sam E. Greenberg. I'm a doctor of psychology and a sexuality researcher and an Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality, intimacy, and relationships. I've been studying the Enneagram for 18 years. I trained with the narrative Enneagram, and I am a type 5 with a sexual instinct dominant subtype.
I am Lindsay Frazier. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist and IEA accredited professional. I have a private practice out of South Minneapolis where I specialize in relationships and sexuality. And I actually got all of my Enneagram training through Enneagram Egypt, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but it is a wonderful program. And I'm very happy to have trained underneath them.
I
Oh,
thought
and I am
I'd
an Enneagram 9, social dominant.
Thought we'd hit the Enneagram credentials a little hard today. Normally, we actually don't mention those. We just say our sexuality credentials mostly. But since we are mostly just talking about the Enneagram today, I thought we would say we actually know what we're talking about as regards the Enneagram in general, which would take us into why we're doing this series. Lyndsey, if you want to explain.
Yeah, as you know, we started with our sexuality basics series a couple months ago, and then we wrapped up with relationship basics series 2 months ago, and then we started last month with the Enneagram basics. And part of the reason we were doing this is that, you know, Sam and I do have expertise and knowledge in a lot of areas, though mostly what you get from us is sexuality and Enneagram. And I think it's just sometimes good to go back to the basic stuff as well in how it influences and affects kind of how we show up in sexuality and relationships in the Enneagram. And so you might start to hear a little bit more of our topics of expertise because we sometimes forget that we have multiple areas of expertise, not just Enneagram and sex.
Perfect. So this is one of them, which is the typing process for finding your type. This is something I talk about all the time, so often with new clients that I actually kind of just forget that it's not necessarily all commonly known to people, even people who are interested in the Enneagram. So we're going to start out on Enneagram tests. And apologize in advance if I'm going to do a little bit of a rant about Enneagram tests. But so we'll talk about Enneagram tests first, and then we'll go into interviewing and some other ways that you can find your type. So starting with tests, kind of my standard disclaimer for everybody is that the Enneagram tests that are available online, and there's some exceptions, we'll name those in a minute, but largely they are not going to be very, very accurate. It's not that they're not accurate at all, but most people I encounter who are new to the Enneagram and looking for their type, they'll just show up and say, oh, well, I took the test and I'm a 7. And like they don't question for a minute that the test result could be wrong. And that's, you know, a lot of the other personality things like Myers-Briggs, et cetera, I think have a little bit of a higher congruency between the test results and the accurate type than the Enneagram does. So In my research, I reviewed all of the typing instruments that were not just the random online ones, but most of the sort of credible ones. And they have varying degrees of validity and reliability, which are the two measures of whether something is an accurate measure of something. Mostly they hover around 60% accurate. That is barely more than half, you know? So it's much better than chance in terms of if we just were going to roll the dice in all nine, but it does not definitively tell you your type. None of them, even the really good ones that Lyndsey and I like to use ourselves, are not going to tell you definitively your type. If you're lucky, you get a result that's the same as the type you ultimately land on. For me, in my anecdotal experience, I'd say it's less than 10% of people I work with whose first time taking a test was the type that they ultimately ended up being. So just so people know, and don't not to get scared away if you're here and you don't know your type, but the typing tests are just a starting point. And that's what both Lyndsey and I tell people who come to us for help with typing or in introductory workshops and things like that. Typing tests are a starting point. You can look at your top 2, 3, even 4 types that come up on the test and look into them more, but don't just take it for granted that what the test is saying is true, because that's a mistake a lot of people make and how we get to mistyping, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode. So, Lyndsey, do you want to, all that said, do you want to tell people the sort of like the good tests that we like to recommend?
Yeah, the tests that we often recommend and some of the free ones are eclectic energies. And we did actually put a link in our bio. If you sign up for our email list, it's right there that you can take it. Similar Minds also has a pretty good online free test. The paid tests that I have found that have been the most accurate is the Enneagram Institute's test or Integrative 9, though they will cost you a little bit money. But just like Sam said, we always look at the Enneagram test sort of as a starting point. Oftentimes, exploring those first 3 to 4 types will kind of help you figure out where to go. And in particular, I think that what I see is that 6s and 9s, which we'll talk more about mistyping, often test incorrectly on any kind of test that they take.
So the Eclectic Energies one, which is the one that we're linking in our newsletter, that one is rarely mentioned in standard Enneagram places, but that's the one I personally have found to be most accurate with people. Again, it's not 100% accurate. It's the starting point, but that one's really good. And of the paid ones, like Lyndsey said, I personally think the IEQ 9, the Integrative 9, is the most accurate of the paid ones. And I forgot how much those cost to take.
Yeah, I can't remember either. It might be, I feel like the Enneagram Institute one might be like $45, and I can't remember what the Integrative 9 one is. But that's also why I like to, when clients come into my office, it's sort of like, if we can find good free tests to take, so you're not having to necessarily pay. So everybody has the financial means to do that, or maybe you don't want to go deep diving into Enneagram and spend the money on that yet. But I can't remember. I think they're around, what I've seen for paid tests is they can be around $25 to $60. And then some of them, depending on what you're doing, can even go higher if you're wanting more information.
So that might kind of bring us to the next method that people use to find their type, which would be typing interviews or interviewing with an Enneagram coach or trained therapist who's accredited or has many years of experience. Lyndsey, do you want to talk about that and kind of how it works?
Yeah, that is, setting up in, a therapy or a coaching appointment, asking for the Enneagram interview. Interestingly enough, a while back, I took a training with Nian Vong where she had someone come in just to help people do the typing interviews. And I actually really liked what that process was. And that person in particular, I can't remember his name now, that she had come in, but he was training around Beatrice and Uranios, where they actually have interviewing questions that kind of helps you determine where the client may land as far as typing. So specific questions that typically are being asked. Some people have more formal questions that they're following. Some people kind of create their own. But one of the things is when you're meeting with an accredited professional or just somebody who has lots of experience, they don't have to necessarily be accredited, because I found some really wonderful people. But I always say, ask people what their background is, because when you get into this kind of field, like kind of anybody can do this, and they may or may not have experience. So asking them, like, how much years of experience have you had? Where do you get your interviewing techniques? Kind of getting that information, I think, is really valid, because even a therapist who has credentials may not necessarily have the skills to interview in a way that's effective. But I think it's just asking those questions. But they'll ask you more specific questions and kind of help you. To me, it's always a collaborative process. Like, we kind of collaborate down to what we think it might be. What would you add to that, Sam?
I have a lot to say about this too. This is gonna be like the Sam goes off on rants episode. So, a few things. One, an Enneagram typing interview can be really helpful, but just like anything, there's people who are good and bad at it. And checking the credentials, like Lyndsey said, is one way, but there's also, unfortunately, some people just have a touch for it and some don't. So just like you might find that like there's good therapists and bad therapists, there's good doctors and bad doctors, even though they all went to medical school the same amount of years, there's still a little bit of that too, unfortunately. So um, I don't know how to advise people to find people who are good at typing. A lot of people are good at typing who have been kind of trained properly, but sometimes like people are trained properly and they are going from their own biases. And when we see people who are bad at typing, that's what they're doing. So they're interviewing someone, oh, well, like you're talking loud. My brother talks loud and my brother's an 8, so you must be an 8. And they use these shortcuts that are really not how we type. Um, I can say the narrative Enneagram, the way they teach typing is that you have questions for each type that you go through, but you are also looking to spot a lot of nonverbal, somatic, and energetic qualities in people, and that's a really essential part of type as well as motivation or how people are going to be answering. Depending on the type of people, they're going to answer accurately or inaccurately. So typing is a tricky process. So that's some of the caveats I want to say about typing interviews. I do typing interviews, and so does Lyndsey. I like to think I'm pretty good at it, but I think everyone likes to think they're pretty good at it. Um, Once in a while, I'll come out the end of it with two different types. Actually, that's fairly common, and say like it's looking like this or this. Here's why. Here's some good resources to look into deeper, so you can decide between these two yourself. Or often I'll come out with one. Once in a blue while, I won't be able to do it, and then I don't charge people. But when I can't do it, they're almost always a 6. So we can talk about mistyping with 6s again in a little bit. So I think it can be an important part of like a typing journey, but again, I wouldn't put all of your stock in it 100%, because it's ultimately up to you, which is something we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Like, you have to be discerning. And like part of like even my like way of doing it is how you feel in the office. So, it's like I had a client more recently where I was like, they tested it, they tested and we looked at things. And they thought they were 8 and 7, but I was like, there's no way you're a 7, because of the embodiment and how they held their body in the actual energy within the room, which is a really hard thing to teach people. It's sort of like having that intuitive knowing, which you start to like I feel people, I know what they feel like. And when the type, so it's such an interesting kind of way to look at it, right? And it's unfortunately, like in every field, there's good end, bad end. People are working through their own stuff and can't see outside of themselves. We could go a whole session or whole episode. I think this is a therapy session, whole episode into sort of what that looks like, but it's complicated.
Definitely. There's also importantly cultural context happening. An example of that is I had an interview with a Latin American guy who was kind of enculturated into machismo culture, was answering all the questions like an 8. Yes, it's important to be strong. No, you can't show vulnerability. No showing weakness. And I was like, everything's 8, 8, 8, check, check, check. And I was like, something is not right here. He's a very deep feeler, very soulful, very emotionally intelligent. I'll skip to the end of this story. He ended up being a type 4. And if you just were answering the questions, like on a test, he would have tested as an 8. If you were just paying attention as an interviewer to his words, he would have tested as an 8. But once, started to see the nonverbals and then dig into that and then talk about, okay, most 4s are externally expressive with their emotions, but this person was taught not to be because that went against his enculturation. So it's like, what does your internal emotional world look like? Oh, well, there's all of the moods. There's all of the ups and downs in the feelings. So it's very complex, and I I think just take everything with a grain of salt in your typing process and your understanding of these things. Um, do you want to talk about books, Lyndsey?
I think what I find with helpful with books, and there's tons of different Enneagram type books out there, right? Is that sometimes when you're reading different books, whether it's the Wisdom of the Enneagram or it's Beatrice Chestnut's book or if it's somebody else's Enneagram book, what I do find can be helpful with that is like as you're reading and they're giving you, like you may start to find yourself in different types. And so having something like a book, and I think there's multiple really good ones out there. Usually I start people off with Wisdom of the Enneagram just because it's really nicely broken down, but I don't think it's the only one where you can get really good information around Enneagram types. It's just that when you're reading different Enneagram types written by different Enneagram types themselves, you start to get a flavor of how the types look and feel, especially with the instinctual stuff, which we're not going to talk about right here, but sometimes you might not quite feel like your type. And authors that do touch on how the instinct influences or puts that flavor on the type, you might start to see yourself within that. And so I know for myself when I was starting this journey, I can't remember exactly what I typed for. I don't think it was a 9 actually when I took the test the first time. Might have been a 1 or a 5, to be honest. But like when I started reading the books, I was like, oh, this doesn't quite fit, or this doesn't quite fit. It's just a really good way to get more information and kind of sit and discover and like, do I see myself here? Do I not see myself here? And I would suggest getting multiple different authors' perspectives on that, because whether we like it or not, everything that is written out of the flair of whatever Enneagram type that individual is. And so understanding how that also is going to impact sort of how books are written or how people see certain types and things like that. But for me, books were huge. It was a very nice resource to read different things, and it really helped me hone in on what type I was when I was in that part.
Perfect. So basically, that takes us into this idea that you have to come to your type on your own, even if you have a professional's help, even if you have a test kind of getting you started, even if you have books. It's ultimately going to be a process. And for some, that process can take years, and that is okay. You can't necessarily trust someone else to tell you who you are inside. You might be acting a certain way on the outside and have a totally different internal experience. Enneagram type is a lot more to do with internal experience and external behavior. So it's ultimately up to you. I think that's important for people to know. What would you add, Lyndsey?
I think exactly that only you yourself can come to that type, and I think also being really careful not to tell other people what their type is. And I actually want to share a really personal example with this that has come in my own life around this, is I'm often told that I'm a different type than what I am. And what's really interesting about it is as a 9 myself, which took me a while to get to, I really didn't want to be a 9. I see myself in a lot of different numbers. And like part of that's influenced by the parents that I had, and the Enneagram types that they are, which is really common for your attachment types or someone that is a 9, right? Where it's like, I see myself in a lot of those. And so it took me a while to actually come to that. And then what would happen is, which is really interesting for me, and I'd be really curious, I actually think this is true for a lot of 9s, people oftentimes think that I am their type. So if you are a 1, you see 1 tendencies in me. And then it's like almost like I reflect back to the other who they are, right? And when we think of an Enneagram 9, that's what we do, right? And so I've had people tell me, like, I think that you're a one. And I'll go on this exploration and I'll be like, oh my God, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I don't know myself, and very nine-ish behaviors again. And I'm looking and seeking, and I always kind of come back to nine. But interestingly enough, people have thought that I'm a nine, or people have thought I'm a one who are ones. People have thought that I'm a six who are six. People have thought that I'm a five who are fives. People that are threes have thought that I'm a three. And for the longest time, I was like, maybe I just don't know myself. And then I saw the pattern. Everybody sees themselves in me,
I am
and
so
saw
glad you
those
told this
characteristics.
story. I was hoping you would tell that story because I really wanted people to know it. That also the people who were telling you that were informed, like well known Enneagram people, not just random people. And that nines are the mirror, they're the perpetual mirror for people. So that does happen to nines, is that people just see themselves and when they look at the nine, and it just goes to show how complex typing is, especially for our attachment types, which is 3, 6, and 9. So, like Lyndsey said, it's quite frowned upon in the Enneagram world to type other people. If someone comes to you and asks your opinion, you can give it. If you're a professional and someone asks for your help, you can help them. But even ourselves who have, multiple decades of experience, we don't say at the end of a typing interview, you are a type 3. We never say that. We say based on what you're sharing today, it looks like there's these patterns that align with 3. What do you think? Here's more information. You can peruse and come back and we can have a dialogue. So it's not great to type other people or to tell them you think they're typed wrong, even if they may be. That's really their journey. So, do we want to go ahead, Lyndsey? You have anything to
Well,
add?
I was just going to add too, and I think that, like, with the desire or want to tell other people what their type is, you have to ask yourself individually, what is the ego function of that? Because it is not our job as human beings to tell other people what they are or what they're not, right? And so when you have that desire or you see something going on with someone else, I'm going to say this, but it's probably actually more about you than it is them. And like, even when you say, like, there is a potential someone is mistyped wrong. And if they're asking you questions or they're curious about, sure, but giving unsolicited advice when someone isn't asking for it or questioning them is ultimately about you. And I think that can be really hard. But again, stepping back and saying, like, why does my ego want to tell this person that they may be typed incorrectly? Because it isn't our job to tell people what their journey is. They got to figure out their own journey. And many people, you might see something that they don't see, and you might even be right, but it is not your place to tell them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has happened to both of us, to Lyndsey more than me, but has happened to me as well. And I want to say one more thing about this, which also takes us into mistyping, which is as someone grows, does a lot of self work, a lot of meditation, a lot of therapy, a lot of inner work of any kind, they're going to start to look different than the stereotypes of their own type. So if myself as a type 5, if you looked at me 20 years ago, I'm going to fit the type 5 stereotypes perfectly. Very lone wolf, internalized, shy, socially isolated, etc. And now, after multiple decades of hard work on myself, I'm going to look a little bit less like that. And I've had someone, especially when I'm kind of gathered my energy to show up, really fully, I've had someone come up and quite angrily say, "You're not a 5." And it was like, probably some projection around the idea of, I don't know if this person was a 5 themselves, I don't think so, but some projection around the idea that it's possible for the 5s maybe in their life to get to this point of showing up and they're not. The easiest way is to tell me that I can't be a 5. So it's kind of just an example. That also keeping in mind with typing yourself is that over time, if you've done a lot of work, you're going to see yourself a little bit less in the descriptions. We just have a comment. I want to type people because then I know what to expect. Control issues and anxiety. Totally relatable. Honestly, that's why I basically come to the Enneagram myself, is it just helps me understand people. I don't think there's anything against typing people in your head a little bit. It's just that if that changes how you treat them or you're going to project onto them stereotypes, then it's not so good. But if you're kind of really deeply diving in the Enneagram and you're like, okay, like this person has three-ish patterns, that just helps me understand. I think that's okay. What we're saying is you don't walk up to that person and say, hey, you're a three. I hope that helps. Diet, smoke, and cokes.
Exactly, Sam, just what you said, right? I think I love the comment. And also, if it's because you want to be generous with the other person by understanding the Enneagram type and you're giving that generosity. So if I think like this person is, XYZ and they may be behaving the way that they are because of their mechanisms of the type and I'm more generous with them, that's a positive no matter what. But it's just like you said, we're not going to go up and be like, hey, by the way, you're XYZ.
So let's touch on mistyping pretty quickly because we're already almost at the end. What do you want to say about mistyping, Lyndsey?
Well, I think one thing, like we talked about in the beginning, there is it is really common for sixes, nines. And I think we could, like you said, put the three in there too, because you added that when we were meeting. Your attachment types can sometimes type incorrectly because they're looking to others on how to show up within the world, which means that sometimes they may not know themselves within that. And so it may take them a little bit longer to come to the type than some other types. Also, I think that there's no shame in mistyping either. I think Sam can talk a little bit to sort of why that might be there, but like many people do mistype.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone can mistype for sure. But the types that, like Lindsay said, can sometimes have a hard time initially finding their type, especially are usually sixes and nines. For me, sixes are the type that has the most trouble because they're answering the questions for every single type. Yes, because they can see themselves everywhere. So just to know that. And in terms of there being no shame, there are multiple examples of really well-known, high-profile Enneagram teachers, coaches who ended up realizing they themselves were mistyped years and years into their practice. And knowing a couple of those people personally, it's so difficult for them saying like, no one's gonna trust me anymore. What about my followers won't follow me anymore? And like, have a whole breakdown and crisis. And it turns out when they came out as their authentic selves, of course, everyone supported them completely. But if, really well resourced Enneagram teachers are going to mistype, then of course anyone can. And like, there's no shame. It's really part of the process, I think. We do have a different episode of Sexy Friday that's on lookalikes. Although our lookalikes episode is more about lookalikes and sexuality and intimacy. But if you're interested, you can find that on our YouTube. Any last thoughts, Lindsay, before we tell people kind of what we have coming up?
I don't think so. Let's tell people what we got going on.
So next month we'll do our third Enneagram Basics episode, topic to be announced. If you have ideas, you can let us know. We have a plan, but we're happy to change it if there's requests for other Enneagram Basics. We're trying to get better at self-promotion, so I'll say I think we could speak intelligently about any Enneagram Basics topic. So if there's anything you want to hear, let us know. And then we're really excited about our new training coming this fall, which is on the Enneagram and Sexuality, the Repressed Instinct. It is our Repressed Instincts and Sexuality training. We're going to be doing a lot of work on repressed instincts this year. And we have our very early pre-sale rate tickets already available for that at the link in our bios. And it's also at tinyurl.com/repressed instincts. We got a comment that says Enneagram Love Relationships. We have a whole YouTube channel that covers that a bunch of times in a bunch of different ways. So we have done that one. And you can find us, is it Enneagram Relationships and Sexuality is our YouTube channel, Lindsay? It's at Lindsay Frazier, I know.
Yeah, it is called that. And then it's also in both of our bios where you can just click to sign up for our newsletter and it'll actually be in that. You can click onto the YouTube channel right from there as well.
Oh, great question. You do not 100% need to know your repressed instinct before the course But I think you get more out of it if you did. And we have kind of like a deal on meeting with us to figure that out. I think we're both pretty good at figuring that out for people. So you can find more about that, I think, at the link, and also you can DM us. But you could definitely take the training without knowing. You just might get a little more out of it if you did know. That's a great question. And then, Lyndsey, do you want to tell people about our new streamlined course?
Yes, and then we have our newly streamlined Enneagram and Sexuality for I can't even talk, transform relationships, where you can get 4 CEUs if you would like that, if you are a therapist, or if you just want to work on yourself. The nice thing about that particular course is that we did have 2 tracks when we did it. So there's the educational portion of it around Enneagram and sexuality, which covers Enneagram type and instincts, as well as a kind of like processing part for whether you're a therapist or whether you are processing it for yourself. And that is on our websites as well as in our bios if you want to sign up for that. And we've gotten really good feedback on that particular course. Many therapists and individuals that are there for themselves really enjoyed it. Like, they learned a lot about relationships and sexuality in the end.
Yes, that's like our great flagship course that we accomplished a really high caliber of course, and then we're just like, oh, we're done, and we forgot to tell people about it afterwards. But it's really nice. And then again, yeah, those CEUs if you're a therapist, and it's also for personal growth. So check those things out at our websites, Instagram bios, YouTube, etc. And we will see everybody next month.
See you next month, Sam.
Bye, Lyndsey.
Bye.